What is up, guys? Good evening. Good evening. It's your favorite mortgage lender, Del Kwame, PureMG, Got Mortgages. Hope you guys are having a blessed week, blessed day. We are going to get cranking right into it today to the topic at hand. We're going to be diving heavily into the topic of supply and demand. We're going to be diving in heavily into the forecast. Was able to get a copy of our presentation today. Actually, comes from our friends over at MBS Highway. So shout out to them. We're going to go over this really quickly. This is some of the things I've been discussing with our referral partners today, and then we're going to be able to dive right into it. Okay. So, with that being said, what are we kind of diving into in terms of the market, in terms of inflation and employment, right? The first thing we're going to look at is when we talk about core inflation. So, core inflation, again, falls under shelter and strips away energy, gas, and any really volatile prices. And as we can kind of see, shelter inflation has been really on a decline, and we're starting to see that massive impact. We were almost as high as 14%. We're now slowly teetering down to 2.5. They mentioned today with the Fed meeting came out and once again reiterated that that we want to be closer to that target rate of 2%, right? There really was no indication in regards to any cuts yet, but we're slowly kind of seeing where that transpires, right? Now, moving on to the next part, what are we seeing predominantly also within shelter inflation? We're starting to see a big need in regards to what is the differences when we talk about avenues of business. What are the differences when we talk about the shifts in regards to shelter, right? And you'll see that in December of 2022, what it is actually replacing is we're replacing a high reading of 0.79%, 0.8% in shelter inflation, all the way down to a reduction of where we're at right now, which is 0.33% when we talk about shelter inflation. So massive reductions in place that we're starting to see, which is starting to create obviously some positivity in regards to the market and start to create some also ideas in regards to are we going to continue to start seeing rates dip even further, right? So the expectations for inflation, what are we kind of expecting? We just obviously saw the release earlier last week for the updated CPI numbers, which came out with, or I'm sorry, PCE numbers came out at zero point 0.1. We're consistently looking at the expectation to be roughly about the same. And then the expectations for the Fed cut. So once again, today we simultaneously saw the Fed have a couple different analysis in regards to whether they were going to cut or whether they were going to hike. More than likely, there's right now a 50-50% ratio as to if they were going to cut or hike. So we'll be able to take that, right? In regards to in May, more than likely, we're going to likely see a cut, right? So I think there's a higher likelihood of there being cut in May than anything like that, right? The Fed dot plot. So the Fed dot plot that we're going to see, that is when we would generally look at the balance sheets and be able to assess from there exactly what the qualifications are. Again, and that's a big one. So kind of backtracking on that, the balance sheet. So we all know that back in 2022, the Fed took a very aggressive approach to wanting to go and hike the federal funds rate. Now, when they did that, they were going to also reduce their balance sheet and buy back in regards to mortgage bonds and treasury yields and stuff like that. So when they pulled back on buying mortgage bonds, we were spending almost as high as $8.5 trillion at one point. When they announced they were going to start tapering, we obviously saw a massive reduction from that standpoint as well, right? Now, what are we seeing also when we talk about the balance sheet? This reduction in balance sheet at the same time is showing where we're at right here, all right? And then the impact, of course, with the GDP numbers, which, sometimes is a little bit skewed, but we're seeing that increase as well, right? Now, as mortgage rates start to decline, okay, they generally do decline during the recessions. So you'll kind of see here in 1980 a drop. Once again in the 80s, we saw a drop in the 90s. So a drop obviously in 2000. The time that people always talk about is obviously the housing bubble. We saw an uptick, which ended up kind of down ticking. And then, of course, the downtick that we saw during COVID, right? So there's consistently that downtick when we talk about that. So again, the expectations within the 2024 market is that we're going to start seeing interest rates start to go from the mid 5 to the high 6s when we take a look at these items, which is pretty crazy. So again, those are the things that we want to kind of keep an eye on for, because I mean, even some of our government loans we're able to lock right now in the mid to high 5s, right? Usually your conventionals is anywhere from the mid to high sixes right now from what we're working with. Of course, the most common question that we're seeing is inventory remaining tight. It has been like this for quite some time. We are still considered in a seller's market, more or less. And you can see here realistically within the inventory of 2023, inventory was always anywhere from 1 to 1.5 million in place, right? Household formations also came out. That came out and outpaced the competition as well when we talked about completions. But we are starting to see a lot more formations. And if there's a positive note we can take is that builder confidence is obviously on the higher side, and we're starting to see a lot more of a positive impact when we start seeing some inflation numbers and start seeing some employment numbers and a lot of the market. Builders are going to start creating more homes, forming more homes, and then simultaneously also completing. As you could see, we're already kind of passing what we've been seeing previously in the past, right? Now, another thing that we always talk about, so everybody always talks about interest rates being slightly higher than they were and whatever. Nobody really talks about also the main thing, which is the wage growth, right? And like we got the JOLTS report yesterday, which came in a little bit higher than expectations, but then we got the ADP report today, which actually came in super low. So it's kind of weird how it always misses. But we also want to keep an eye on wage growth and the impact of wage growth. Is it competing at the same level of inflation? Those are the things that we really want to keep an eye on for. So the reality of it is the increase in the media claims is really not as high as they do because of these differences. Okay. And the last thing I want to touch on again, what are we having a lot of success with is a lot of our broker programs. We're starting to see a lot of success handling our rehab loans or 203Ks. We don't just talk about them, we're actually cranking away and actually doing them. Our DPAs, we've got two dedicated loan officers that are handling those DPAs. Our HELOCs, we're able to do both investment and owner-occupied HELOCs. We've got your typical DSCR loan and P&L. We have DSCRs of three different tiers. Those that actually cover 100%, the 1.0 DSCR, the 1.25 where it covers it and then some. And then we have obviously one that actually is a no DSCR. It's essentially a no doc, no DSCR, and we take it from there. And then we have a bank statement loan, which allows us the ability to add up all the borrower's deposits. And then what we do is it has to be straight deposits for the business, but we take those deposits and then we just hit the consumer with a 20% expense ratio. So essentially, we take an 80% deposit, and that gives us the ability to qualify the client. Now, of course, the rates are usually a little bit higher. Any non-QM loan, the rate's going to be a little higher, but it still gives the consumer the opportunity to obviously qualify, right? And then we have our 1 year income loans as well. That is generally the stated loans, and those are usually, again, done through either Freddie Mac, where we have a 1 year program, or if you're self-employed for more than 5 years, we could do that, or we have other certain avenues outside that give us the ability to run the same. Okay. And that's about it. One thing I wanted to kind of touch base on, we're going to check exactly what we're kind of seeing with the volatility. So, like you can kind of see, not much volatility, but what we're seeing with interest rates, if we kind of find out where has the market been teetering over the last, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks, you guys can check it out. Let's filter this to be a little closer. Let's say 10/30/2023. And we are seeing a massive drop, right? And this is what we really wanted to kind of see. We saw a big downtick since then. I mean, if we brought it back even further, one more month, you can see where we started seeing a downtick right after Halloween. And it was like, boom. Then the Fed announced they were going to cut. So we started seeing an even further drop, right? And then now we've been kind of teetering really over the last, I would say, basically month and a half around this 6.62, 6.7 mark, which is kind of where we're at ending today, right? And that's where more or less where we're ending at the 6.75 mark. So really good news for a lot of our buyers, right? We were always seeing red, which means that basis points were going up. They're now consistently on the decline, dropping. Today was a very big day with the ADP report coming out that showed a little bit less jobs being created than expectations. Remember, that measures private payroll. And then we started seeing a little bit of a downtick at the same time when we talked about wage growth. So those are the two main things that we're always going to keep an eye out. Again, the conclusion of the Fed meeting, I'm going to shoot a quick video on that momentarily. But they're really kind of showing that there were no talks of potential hikes, which is great. Of course, they're not going to go out flat out and say that we're going to be cutting rates. They did kind of indicate that they may potentially, or basically Jerome Powell said that they don't necessarily foresee cuts in March, but they're not throwing it out. So, and that's generally the comments from the Fed will usually kind of be black and white. But we'll kind of see exactly what the expectations are when it comes to that. And then, of course, as always, I will keep you guys updated. I appreciate you guys jumping on for this week. Any questions that you guys have, let us know. Visit our website, gotmortgages.com. Thanks, guys.